Welcome to our deep dive into Vistra Energy. You've sent over a really interesting collection of research notes and articles. And it looks like we're going to be uncovering how this company is navigating the changing energy landscape.
Yeah. From what I've seen, they're involved in everything, from natural gas to nuclear power to those massive data centers powering the AI boom.
Definitely a lot to unpack. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is Vistra Energy?
Well, Vistra is one of the largest competitive power providers in the U.S. They generate electricity, sell it to retail customers, and develop energy solutions.
And they're publicly traded.
Yes. They trade on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol VST. Their market cap is currently around $57.8 billion.
Okay, so big company, publicly traded. What kind of energy do they actually produce?
Well, their energy production comes from a few different sources. They have two main business units, Vistra Zero and Vistra Traditional Generation.
What's the difference?
Vistra Zero focuses on renewables and nuclear power, while Vistra Traditional Generation manages their natural gas, coal, and some nuclear plants.
So it seems like they're trying to balance the old with the new.
Exactly. Their 2024 portfolio breakdown shows that natural gas makes up 56% of their energy production, with nuclear at 18%, coal at 14%, and renewables and battery storage at 12%.
Wow. Natural gas is still a big part of their business.
It is for many energy companies right now. But Vistra is investing heavily in solar battery storage and wind energy under their Vistra Zero initiative. They're clearly trying to diversify their energy mix.
And they've significantly expanded their nuclear capacity, right?
That's right. They acquired Energy Harbor in 2023, which added 4 nuclear plants to their portfolio.
That's a big move. And it's attracting attention from some pretty high-profile investors like Nancy Pelosi.
Yes. Her recent investment in Vistra call options, which give her the right to buy Vistra stock at a certain price in the future, has definitely sparked a lot of discussion.
I can see why. What exactly did she do?
She purchased 50 call options on Vistra stock with a strike price of $50 and an expiration date of January 2026. The estimated value of these options is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million.
That's a significant investment. What do you think it tells us?
It's difficult to say for certain what motivates any individual investor, but it's certainly interesting timing given Vistra's recent moves in the nuclear sector.
It seems like they're betting big on nuclear power playing a key role in the clean energy transition.
They certainly seem to be positioning themselves that way, and their financial performance seems to be reflecting these strategic choices.
So let's dive into those financials. How did they perform in 2024?
Their 2024 revenue was around $19.3 billion. Representing year-over-year growth. Their net income was $1.84 billion, exceeding analyst expectations. And their adjusted EBITDA reached $6.5 billion.
Those are some pretty impressive numbers.
They are, and their stock price reflects this performance. As of February 7, 2025, Vistra closed at $166.90 per share.
So what's driving these positive financial results?
Higher electricity prices and rising demand for power are certainly contributing factors. But it's also important to consider the rising demand from the AI industry data centers, which are essential for AI development, require enormous amounts of energy. And Vistra is positioning itself as a key provider.
So they're essentially powering the AI boom.
It seems so. They're also strategically hedging and managing costs, which is improving their profitability.
It sounds like they're making savvy business decisions on multiple fronts. But what are the challenges they're facing?
Well, the energy sector is notoriously volatile. Regulatory uncertainty around environmental policies and fluctuating energy prices can all impact their bottom line.
Not to mention the high capital expenditures required for nuclear and renewable expansion.
Exactly. Those investments are necessary for long-term growth, but they can strain finances in the short term. It's a delicate balancing act.
We've been talking about how Vistra is this major player in the energy sector. But how does all this actually affect people like you and me?
Well, think about all the things we rely on electricity for. Lighting our homes, powering our appliances, charging our devices. Vistra is one of the companies responsible for making sure that electricity is available when we need it.
That's a pretty big responsibility.
It is. And it's not just about keeping the lights on. Vistra's role, empowering those massive data centers, has huge implications for the technology we use every day.
Because those data centers are what make the internet work.
Exactly. Everything from social media to online shopping to streaming services relies on the processing power of those data centers. And that processing power requires a huge amount of energy.
So Vistra is kind of like the fuel behind our digital lives.
That's a good way to think about it. And it puts them in a powerful position. As the demand for computing power grows, so does the demand for Vistra's services.
But as we were talking about before, there are challenges too.
Right. The energy sector is facing a lot of pressure to reduce carbon emissions. And Vistra has to figure out how to balance their reliance on fossil fuels with their investments in clean energy.
Otherwise, they could face backlash from investors and consumers who are concerned about the environment.
Exactly. And there's also the constant uncertainty of government regulations. Policies around energy and climate change are always evolving, which makes it difficult for companies like Vistra to plan for the future.
It sounds like they have to be very adaptable to stay ahead of the game.
They do. And that's what makes Vistra such an interesting case study. They're at the forefront of this massive energy transition, grappling with all these complex challenges and making decisions that will impact all of us.
So their story is really a reflection of the bigger picture.
Exactly. Vistra's successes and failures will tell us a lot about the direction the energy industry is headed.
Okay. We've talked about their business model, their financials, and the challenges they're facing. But how do they actually compare to other energy companies? What are their strengths and weaknesses?
Well, one of their biggest advantages is their size. They're the largest competitive power producer in the U.S., which gives them a lot of influence in the market.
And it probably gives them access to resources that smaller companies don't have.
Right. They have the financial muscle to invest in new technologies and infrastructure, which is essential in such a rapidly changing industry.
And we've seen them do that with their acquisitions and investments in nuclear and renewables.
Exactly. Another strength is their diverse energy mix. They're not relying on just one source of energy, which helps them manage risk and adapt to changes in the market.
It's like a diversified investment portfolio. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. But of course, there are downsides to being such a large and diversified company.
What do you mean?
Managing a company of that size and complexity is a huge challenge. It requires a lot of expertise and coordination to keep everything running smoothly.
And they're also more exposed to those regulatory uncertainties we were talking about.
Right. Any changes in government policy can have a big impact on their operations. And then there's the issue of public perception, especially around nuclear power.
Because some people still have concerns about the safety of nuclear energy.
Exactly. Even though Vistra views nuclear as a clean energy solution, they need to address those concerns and convince the public that it's a safe and responsible choice.
It sounds like they have a lot on their plate.
They do, but it's important to remember that their decisions have consequences for all of us.
So we should all be paying attention to how this unfolds.
Absolutely. And it's not just about Vistra. It's about the future of energy and how we're going to power our world in a sustainable way.
That brings us back to that investment from Nancy Pelosi. What do you think it tells us about the future of nuclear energy?
It's difficult to speculate on her motivations, but her investment has definitely brought more attention to the potential of nuclear power as a clean energy source.
And it highlights the complex debates surrounding this issue.
Right. Some people believe nuclear power is essential for reducing carbon emissions, while others have concerns about the risks and costs involved.
So there are no easy answers.
There aren't. And that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. We're at a pivotal moment in history, and the choices we make now will have lasting consequences.
It's a lot to think about. But before we get too deep into those big questions, let's take a closer look at how Vistra is specifically addressing the challenges of powering those AI data centers. We were just talking about the challenges of powering those massive AI data centers. Can you give us a sense of just how much energy we're talking about?
It's a staggering amount. Data centers already account for about 2% of global electricity consumption, and that number is only going to increase as AI becomes more sophisticated and integrated into our lives.
That's a pretty significant chunk of energy.
It is, and it's a bit of a paradox. AI has the potential to help us solve some of the world's biggest problems, including climate change, but it also requires a huge amount of energy, which often comes from fossil fuels.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of companies like Vistra making smart decisions about how they power these facilities.
What are some of the ways they can make those data centers more sustainable?
There are a few key strategies.
Yeah.
One is investing in renewable energy sources like solar and wind power to offset the reliance on fossil fuels.
That makes sense. But are those renewable sources always reliable enough to power something as energy-intensive as a data center?
That's a valid point. Renewables are intermittent, meaning they're not always available when you need them. That's why battery storage is so important.
So they can store excess energy generated during peak times and use it when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
Exactly. Another important factor is energy efficiency.
How does that work in a data center?
Well, data centers are basically giant warehouses filled with servers, and those servers generate a lot of heat, Keeping those servers cool requires a significant amount of energy.
So they're basically running giant air conditioners all the time.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
But there are ways to make those cooling systems more efficient. For example, some data centers are using liquid cooling systems instead of traditional air conditioners, which can significantly reduce energy consumption.
That's interesting. So it's not just about where the energy comes from, but also how efficiently it's being used.
Right. It's a multifaceted challenge, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. But it's encouraging to see companies like Vistra exploring these different strategies and trying to find ways to power the digital world in a more sustainable way.
It sounds like Vistra is really at the heart of this conversation about the future of energy and technology.
They are, and their decisions will have ripple effects throughout the entire industry.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Vistra Energy, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the energy landscape is changing rapidly, and there are no easy answers. Companies like Vistra are facing complex challenges as they try to balance the demand for reliable and affordable energy with the need to transition to cleaner sources, and their choices will have a big impact on all of us.
Well, this has been a fascinating look at Vistra Energy and the complexities of the energy transition. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.